In December of 2015, I gave a webinar on Sunday morning best practices for youth groups, and in interviewing 8 congregations across the U.S., from Vero Beach, Florida to Brooklyn, New York to Anchorage, Alaska, these are thriving youth programs. We discovered that these programs weren't engaged in regular spiritual practice on Sunday morning, and that screamed to me a massive deficit in how we should be approaching enriching and nourishing our youth, in particular their faith formation, so that they have tools to celebrate, so they have tools to mourn and to deal with a rigorous youth existence, and also a method of calling themselves home, a way of recognizing their Unitarian Universalist heritage through spiritual practice.
Eric Bliss called me and asked if I would be the keynote speaker for this youth revival. And I love youth and I love revivals, so I thought that's going to be fun. And then I had the idea when we realized the theme was spiritual practices, that I didn't want to do a keynote as an adult to youth. I want to do it with youth for youth. And so he asked me that we gathered 6 youth and we met virtually as a study group from all over to discuss and go deep, almost monthly. We talked for an hour and a half on what are spiritual practices. Now, not just spiritual practices that we borrow from other faiths, which honestly drives me a little nuts, without any kind of relationship to the other faith. We were asking the question, what are spiritual practices that are just ours, that are just Unitarian Universalist? They named the chalice lighting as a core spiritual practice. They named covenant as our absolutely core spiritual practice of which all things flow. We're in good hands if our youth understand that covenant is our core spiritual practice, and that the coming back of falling out is part of our practice because we're human.
This is awesome. Wow. What if it doesn't work all the time? Breaks in covenant inevitably occur.
But the coming back in, and how do you come back into right relationship, is what we do as Unitarian Universalists. And that having a relationship with our ancestors. So what are spiritual practices that help us enliven and pull those lessons from those who have gone before, and give gratitude for where we are, that we're not in this, we didn't come here on our own.
It seems as though our defining principle would be gratitude, all that we have and all that we need to give in return. And not just on the skin deep level, but also in terms of understanding that everything in the universe is interconnected and codependent, and being grateful for what we have and for giving back.
And then to honor and make the way easier for those who we're walking with now, that we come together to create something larger than ourselves. Paloma talked about social justice as spiritual practice. It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing.
So faithful activism is always a direct religious experience, because you're simultaneously living your faith and your values. And in the context of UUism, a direct experience with faith and action should involve lifting up our own principles and letting go of our ego, which is something that doesn't always happen in secular activism.
From her own experience, we have been trying to make it a spiritual practice this weekend of listening to one another's stories and experiences, bringing our attention, a sense of repetition.
The Revivals workshops really integrated a varied approach to spiritual practice, from the lens of beloved community and the experience of marginalized members of our youth communities. We also had an attention towards uniquely UU spiritual practices, things that come from our Unitarian heritage, things that came from our Universalist heritage. We had workshops that talked about how do we bring these tools and practices home, not just to transform our youth groups, but also to have our youth groups in conversation with the larger adult community so that the entire congregation could be transformed.
I had the opportunity to give a workshop on bringing the revival back home. One of the things people often say at youth events is, why can't everything be like this? Why can't we always feel like this when we're in community? And part of what I thought they might think about is, why can't we have this spiritual depth in our congregations all the time? Why does it only happen at youth events? Well, I know it can happen in our congregations too, so I gave a workshop about how to infuse their home congregation with that wonderful spiritual passion and depth that they experienced at the revival. And it was really fun.
And what's revival without jammin' worship? We were so blessed with music by Matt Meyer that uplifted, energized, and renewed our commitment to our faith. There was also co-creation by a team of adults and youth working together to come up with an embodied, multi-sensory experience with prayer stations, drumming circles, and yes, even Play-Doh and pipe cleaners. All spiritual practices were indeed welcome in that place.
The highlight of the revival for me was watching the kids dance and sing in worship. Their worship was so embodied, it was amazing. They were not falling asleep, they were not looking over the order of service trying to find the typos. They were dancing and they were singing and they were smiling at each other, and it was just so alive.
People are hungry for this work. Practicing at the various levels, internally, interpersonally, and communally, are things that people are hungry and yearning for.
I believe that having our congregations be homes of realistic, embodied, enlivening spiritual practice will help our congregations grow and thrive in the future. I believe that people are no longer looking for a place to get away from folks who believe differently from them and just have the closed group of people who are just like them, who want to avoid spirituality. I believe the future of Unitarian Universalism embraces an enlivened and empowering spirituality that will save the world.
Our movement is at a pivotal stage. We're at this kind of pubescent stage in our metamorphosis as a faith. And it's really time to embrace practice, to embrace religious language, to take it back from the right and claim our place in the religious landscape of the United States.
We are